All right, so today we're going to unpack one of the most transformative periods in, well, all of world history, the Napoleonic Wars. And look, this wasn't just a series of battles. No, this was an entire era that completely reshaped Europe, and it all revolved around the incredible ambition of just one man. I mean, for more than a decade, you had conflict just raging across the continent. We're talking from the sunny fields of Spain all the way to the frozen plains of Russia. And when the smoke finally cleared, the map of Europe and the very idea of what a nation could be was changed forever. It's honestly hard to even grasp the sheer scale of it all. And right at the center of this whole storm was one figure, Napoleon Bonaparte. So the big question we're asking in this explainer is pretty simple, but it's also incredibly profound. How on earth did the ambition of this one man ignite a fire that would literally remake an entire continent? Okay, so to really understand Napoleon, you have to start with the chaos that basically created him. The French Revolution had just completely shattered the old way of doing things, and into that power vacuum steps this brilliant, unbelievably ambitious military mind who just seized his moment. And his rise was just, well, meteoric is the only word for it. Think about it. In less than 10 years, he goes from being this celebrated general in Italy, famous for these lightning-fast victories, to seizing total political power as first consul of France. And then, in 1804, he crowns himself emperor. That made his intentions crystal clear. He wasn't just defending France anymore, he was building a new empire. All right, so this next phase, this is where the legend of Napoleon the military genius is really forged. For a while there, he seemed absolutely invincible. He was the undisputed master of Europe. So you might be asking, what was his secret? Well, one of his biggest innovations was this revolutionary military structure called the corps system. See, before Napoleon, armies were these big, clunky, slow-moving blobs that had to stay together. He changed all that. He broke his massive army, the Grande Armée, into these smaller, self-sufficient mini armies. They could move fast, live off the land, and act independently. This gave him a speed and a flexibility that his enemies they couldn't keep up. And the Battle of Austerlitz is the perfect example of this in action. It was his absolute masterpiece. He deliberately makes his right flank look weak, right? Just baiting the combined Austro-Russian army into a trap. They take the bait, abandon the strategic high ground to attack, and that's when he springs it. He seizes the heights they just left, smashes right through their center, and completely splits their army in two. Just a true tactical masterclass. And the thing is, Austerlitz wasn't just a one-off. Not at all. He used these kinds of tactics again and again, crushing the Prussians at Jena, then the Russians at Friedland. See, he didn't just win battles, he annihilated entire armies, shattering one coalition after another until he basically stood on top of the entire continent. But, and there's always a but, isn't there? Even here, at the absolute peak of his power, the empire was already starting to show some serious cracks. In a way, his greatest strengths were about to become his biggest weaknesses. The first major problem? Spain. He invaded, put his brother on the throne, and probably expected a pretty quick and easy victory. But what he got instead was what historians call the Spanish ulcer, a brutal, unending guerrilla war that just drained his empire of men, money, and resources year after year. It was like an open wound that would never heal. And that war in Spain was just one piece of the puzzle. You also had his economic blockade against Britain, the continental system, which totally backfired and ended up hurting his allies more than anyone. Then there's this powerful new force rising up, nationalism. The very ideas of liberty his armies were spreading were now being turned against him, as people in Spain and Germany started to unite against French rule. And through it all, his own relentless ambition meant he just couldn't compromise. He kept pushing, alienating everyone, friend and foe alike, stretching his empire to its absolute breaking point. So, you've got this perfect storm brewing, overreach from the inside and growing resistance from the outside. And all of it sets the stage for one of the most dramatic collapses in modern history. The end didn't come slowly, it was swift and absolutely catastrophic. The real turning point, the fatal mistake, was the invasion of Russia in 1812. I mean, he marched in there with the largest European army ever assembled at the time. We're talking over 600,000 soldiers. But the Russians just drew him deeper and deeper into their vast country. And then, the Russian winter hit. The army that came staggering out of Russia was just a frozen, starving ghost of what it once was. Just look at this number. It's It's just devastating. Of the over 600,000 soldiers who went in, fewer than 100,000 managed to stagger back out. The Grande Armée, the very tool he'd used to conquer Europe, had been essentially destroyed, not by a single battle, but by starvation and the cold. Yeah, that disaster in Russia completely shattered his aura of invincibility. Suddenly, he looked vulnerable, and that encouraged all of his old enemies to get together and form a massive new coalition against him. They finally defeated him at the massive Battle of Nations, and even after a brief comeback, the final fatal blow came at Waterloo in 1815. And just like that, the empire was over. So, with Napoleon finally gone, the old powers of Europe all got together. Their job? To try and clean up the absolute mess he'd left behind, put the continent back together, and most importantly, make sure that no one like him could ever rise again. And their game plan, which they hashed out at the Congress of Vienna, was really all about turning back the clock. First, they focused on legitimacy, basically putting the old kings and queens back on their thrones. Then they redrew the map of Europe, creating buffer states to keep France contained. And finally, they tried to create this delicate balance of power, so no one single country could get too strong and dominate everyone else. Their goal, above all, was stability. But there was one massive problem with their whole plan. You see, Napoleon's armies didn't just carry guns, they carried ideas. The ideals of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, fraternity, had spread all across the continent. And, kind of ironically, by fighting against a French emperor, people in places like Germany and Italy and Spain, they had started to discover their own sense of national identity. This powerful new force called nationalism was born. And that really brings us to our final big question. The old kings and diplomats at Vienna, they tried so hard to restore the world as it was before Napoleon. But his wars that unleashed these forces, they just couldn't control. So let me ask you, can you ever truly put the ideals of a revolution back in the bottle once they're out? Well, the rest of the 19th century, with its endless waves of revolutions and nationalist wars, gave a pretty clear answer to that. Absolutely not.